Hello there. Welcome to the next session, which is a panel discussion titled Coding Inclusivity in Tech on Everyday D&I. So, diversity and inclusion is an important topic for us in the tech industry today, and inclusion nonetheless begins with an I. At AzConf, we are exploring what each one of us can do to help make diversity, equity, and inclusion part of the technology culture. So, the next panel discussion would focus on how you and I can create more inclusive environments. Our eminent panelists will be sharing unique perspectives based on their rich experience into how each one of us can help foster a more tech inclusive workspace. Regardless of where you are on your DNI journey today, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. So, proudly presenting the panelists for the evening, Mathew, who's Director Developer Relations at Microsoft Asia Pacific. She's a business leader with a proven track record across various industries from consumer devices to healthcare. Annie contributes to industry thought leadership, has held multiple board positions, is a recipient of several accolades. Welcome, Annie. Pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Liji.
Our second panelist is Jiby Joyce. Jiby is Vice President and India Head Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, Credit Suisse. As a diversity and inclusion professional, Jiby has been responsible for promoting equality and reducing discrimination from workplaces to the wider community. Pleasure to have you join us, Jiby. Welcome.
Thank you. Likewise, Liji. Thank you.
And Sunita Venkatachalam, Director of Technology Data Engineering Target with career stints at Yahoo, Infosys, Oracle, and ThoughtWorks. Sunita has over 2 decades of rich industry experience. She's a believer in affirmative action, and she feels strongly about initiatives for the disadvantaged. Glad to have you with us, Sunita. Welcome.
Thank you, Liji.
So let's jump right in. So I was reading a couple of articles recently, and I happened to read some interesting statistics, let's say. It appears that the job of the moment is not of a software developer or a UX designer or an AI/ML engineer, as I would have expected it to be. It apparently is the role of the Chief Diversity Officer. If you call it the Director of Diversity or the Diversity Manager, but nonetheless, I mean, it's great to see that there is a concerted effort and there's a focused approach to D&I, and obviously the businesses might have understood that we need a strategic plan to sort of move the needle, let's say. But really, whose job is D&I and diversity and inclusion, especially inclusion, right? So who really is responsible for inclusion? Let's start with you, Jiby. You are in an official capacity as the DEI head. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspectives on who you think is actually responsible for D&I.
Right. Thank you, Liji, for that question. And first of all, huge thank you for having invited me for this conference. And Annie and Sunita, glad sharing this platform with you and looking forward to our shared thoughts on this. I would just say, let us first understand that by the definition of inclusion, I think every employer, has an obligation to provide employees with a safe work environment, which is free of, let's say, discrimination or harassment and intimidation, etc. Right. So in that perspective, I think everyone is an employer. We are all managers and boss and colleague to someone. One of our colleagues around us. So the responsibility of an inclusion is everybody's, but we need to also start looking into D&I or diversity and inclusion, not just from a point of responsibility. I think it is or from a responsible task, because sometimes, responsibility can just be interpreted in many, many ways. For example, responsibility can be KPIs, or it can be number games. And once we meet that target, D&I efforts can actually take a backseat in many companies. So in my view, inclusion can really hit the ground when there is a mindset change and when we start addressing our own behaviors, which may make someone feel excluded. So that is everybody's responsibility, not just towards our employees who are around us or who are there across the pyramid of the organization, but also towards our suppliers, our vendors, our external stakeholders and partners. Now, is that an easy task? No, it is not. Right? I mean, we all agree that it's a humongous task to achieve, especially for a large organization or mid-sized organization. So therefore, companies in the last decade or so have started focusing on D&I not just as a good factor, but also as a necessary business imperative. Which is why I think D&I roles have become a very, very crucial and a critical part of the company's fabric. D&I careers have boomed, and also D&I leaders have a very important role to drive cultural changes in the organization. But I must reiterate that it is not just the D&I team's role, but also the executive leadership who play a vital role in setting real foundational changes in the organization. So just to summarize my answer to your question, in my view, inclusion is everybody's responsibility, and this can be achieved when each of us is trying to create a psychological safe environment for our colleagues, our team members, juniors, seniors, our suppliers, etc. So, and then we ensure, that they're all able to thrive towards business results. Back to you, Jiby.
Great. Thank you so much, Jiby. I am so happy that you said that as well. I'm sure the audience would probably not have expected that coming from you, but then thank you so much for saying that. Sunita, what are your thoughts on the same?
Totally agree with Jiby, right? So I think a parallel that we can relate to when it comes to, let's say, hiring, right? The I think typically the number one source for hiring is actually referrals, right? Employee referrals. So if employees are taking it upon themselves to get great talent into the company, if employees are taking it upon themselves to do team outings, right? I mean, so many of our team members actually plan these really amazing team outings, even virtually. If employees are involved in every aspect of their engagement and growth in hiring, then they should certainly be involved in bringing a diverse workforce into the organization. So it cannot be the responsibility of a function, right? Having said that, the signals, the creation of these roles signal a certain level of importance and gravity from the organization. Basically, it's no longer just talk, right? People are actually funding a position. They are creating, plans and strategies around this. So they lay the framework and the scaffolding and the foundations, but the gaps and the filling of those has to be done in close concert with team members, right, with employees. So certainly believe that I'm a big believer of affinity groups in the organization. I think people who belong to an affinity group, they all say that their level of engagement is higher, right? And now this affinity group also has a voice. If they can influence the strategy by sharing feedback to the leadership, so naturally, that means that employees need to be as plugged in and not treated as if it is somebody else's job. Over to you, Nidhi.
Absolutely. I think you kind of nailed it with the references link, Sunita, that talks volumes to, what the company is right from within. When we hear a lot of companies are, for all good reasons, certified great place to work and so and so, there isn't a greater voice or a greater advocacy in terms of, you can share out all the money that you need in terms of marketing and everything, but to hear that firsthand from the people within, live testimonies, first-hand experiences really means a lot. So thank you for sharing that. Annie, would you like to share some thoughts on this?
Yes, Liji, I totally agree with what Jiby and Sunita was saying. It's everybody's role. And in a tech conference like this, where we have got developers and data engineers and data scientists around, and we're working with the latest technology that's impacting us personally. I mean, the decisions that are being made is being written in some algorithm and such. So then whose responsibility is diversity and inclusion? I mean, Jiby and Sunita both alluded, and yourself, Liji, as well, that it's a business problem, not exactly just a cultural problem that we are talking about. So what the business is really facing is that these technologies actually run on trust. If the users don't trust the technology, it is not going to be adopted. And if you take just AI as a case in point, bias can be coded into the solutions, the algorithms, just by having unconscious bias. You may not even be aware of the bias that you have. And there's opportunity in the data to build that bias, in the algorithm to build that bias, in the design of the solution, in who your target audience is, who's the endpoint, which devices are you getting the data from. There's bias all over that's potentially waiting to enter your solution. Now, in that case, I do feel very, very strongly, and I'm sure there's a lot of industry voice behind this as well, that it's every person in that life cycle of a product, to a design, to coding, to user testing, to actually the end users. All of us are involved in ensuring that these technologies and solutions are bias free. That literally translates to inclusion every day, at every work, in every project, in every code you write, and even in every product and solution that I use as a person. I have a responsibility to go back and give feedback that, hey, this is not usable, or that this is kind of a biased solution that is coming. Now, this is a standard industry problem. We are still dealing with it. There are no obvious solutions as yet. And so it's all our responsibilities. To Jiby's point, the individual's responsibility, and as Sunita mentioned, if this is then the organization's point, and even if you take it to a larger extent, for example, in AI, there is a cross-organization coalition that is working on the whole responsible AI piece, and how do you make these solutions bias-free and equitable for everyone. So yes, thoroughly, it is everyone's responsibility, but then everyone's responsibility at so many layers. Me at home as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, but coming to the organization as a coder, as a team manager, huge responsibility as a team manager, maybe a product manager. If I'm in the management, then there, and at so many levels. And so it's hard. It's really hard because a lot of it's unconscious too. So that's interesting conversations that we can have today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Annie. And you kind of summarized that really well in the context of a technical journey as well. And you bring about another very important point in terms of biases and the AI side of things. In fact, just how our biases, conscious and unconscious, sort of creeps into those products and services that we as techies are so proud to create on a daily basis. We take, as I was saying to Irina in the morning, we're just so proud of our craftsmanship, but we probably do not realize the value that diverse perspectives, that inclusion in terms of our thought processes can actually bring. And really, diversity and inclusion, at least in an India perspective, is mostly discussed around dimensions of gender, maybe a little bit into the persons with disability as well. But as organizations, continue to define diversity at a more broader level, do you think that we need a more holistic understanding of this space now that we realize that there's very less question on the why of it? I think most people definitely get the why of it. So do you think that we need a more broader and a more holistic understanding of this space of diversity and inclusion? Sunita, if we can start with you, please.
Thanks, Liji. You mentioned people with disabilities. There's also a lot of focus on LGBTQIA plus, right? So there's, but now I can see in Target as well, there's a lot of focus on pride, groups, and in making sure that we are basically opening up our culture, make people from all backgrounds feel more welcome at the company, right? I think the easy one, the most visible one to go after has been gender diversity, which has been our focus for a long time, and quite frankly needs to continue to be, right? Because there is still a long way to go. There's a lot of conversation happening today, and you'll see a lot more companies are opening up because there is also a big war for talent. So it's almost imperative. I mean, you cannot survive, you cannot hire people if you have not opened the doors and you're not constantly chasing down diverse candidates to join your company. But what we should do at this point is to leverage this culture, this cultural moment that we have right now, where companies have finally opened up and are bringing in all of these conversations to drive a bigger diversity agenda, right? And that means, I mean, when I was listening to Aishaka's conversation or just discussion presentation, the one before this, and it amazed me the amount of diversity that there is, neurodiversity and people, all of this personality diversity, right? How do we code processes in the organization that can actually prevent us from unintentionally weeding out people with these different types of diverse perspectives is something that we should have that conversation now, right? So it should go beyond this number game, 50% target and 75% target of women, and it should also, we should take what we've learned from this movement into removing the biases from our processes, promotion processes, hiring processes, all the people management processes that we have, and even our job descriptions. How open are they to how do they encourage people from varied backgrounds to apply? So I think it is not about now saying, okay, I have done the women, now I'll come up with another number for abilities, I'll come up with another number for pride, which is fine. But it's also about taking a hard look at all our processes and see, are they really open to including people from just different backgrounds? Can we separate out what is core, absolutely needed, and what where we can or we will benefit from diverse perspectives? I think that is something, that conversation I feel is something we need to continue to have, because unfortunately there is almost a parallel to quality and diversity. So the moment you say diversity, it feels like you're lowering the bar. We need to change that conversation to say, hey, how high was your bar if you were only hiring one type of people? What kind of bar is that anyways? So it wasn't even a good bar to begin with. Can we please smash that, and can we just open up our processes to make it more welcoming for people from all backgrounds to apply? So that is kind of where I feel we need to expand our diversity thought processes.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Sunita. And as you said, what kind of a bar is it in the first place? Do we have a bar itself, right? So great thoughts there. Annie, do you think that organizations, continue to still define diversity through the gender lens, or do you see progress, and do you see what other, dimensions do you see them tackling?
Well, I think there is progress, and primarily because of two things. One is that it's actually become a business imperative, if you deeply think about it, because you're building products and solutions for the world. And if you're building for a narrow segment, that is fine. But if you're really building that product or solution for the world or a diverse set of population, then you do need to have your developing team should also be able to appreciate the user needs and things like that, which means you should have a diverse audience. So the core need here is diversity of thought. And that's a point from where we could think about what kind of diversity. So if I need, of course, I need gender diversity, because 50% of the world population is female. So you need gender diversity. And then you need all other kinds of diversity, including sexual preferences, including racial preferences or racial ethnicity. You need to look at it from an urban versus rural positioning, from the age group, right? And so on and so forth. So there is an absolute need to look at different types of diversity, but the capacity of an organization to tackle all this is limited too, which is where we hit a roadblock. And we know that to move the needle on anything, you need to have focus. And so when you have, in fact, at Microsoft, we recently launched Code Without Barriers, which is about gender diversity. And the frequent question I get is that, why are you focusing only on gender? So I was like, we're not focusing only on gender. We also have an accessibility initiative. We also have an LGBTI initiative, and so on and so forth. But here we are talking about the gender lens, and these set of actions are meant for that. So, so that's where we are, I think. And one more thing I would like to just share is that from a national perspective, this is super important, right? So you want to increase your GDP, and that means you need to bring more people into your labor force, which means you need to bring in their untapped segment back into the labor force, which could be lying across all of this. And so it's all kinds of diversity, and probably need separate motions to really tap into it.
Yep, absolutely. I think when you said the diversity of the thought process itself, it shows the kind of backgrounds and the kind of the dimensions that we need to bring into this. Jiby, would you agree with this? Do you have thoughts as well to share on this?
Absolutely, I agree with both Sunita and Annie here. Now, first of all, I just want to clarify that the term gender diversity is not just about hiring one gender over the other. And in most cases, we think about hiring more women into the workforce. So gender diversity, by its definition, it most commonly refers to an equal ratio between men and women. Right. So while most of us agree that that in order to have a fair and productive work environment, an equal balance of men and women is required, and most commonly not, this is not the case despite of the modern age that we're living in. We definitely have achieved a lot in the last decade or so, but there's a long way to go, as what Sunita and Annie said. Now, gender diversity in a workplace. In my head, it means that men and women are hired at a similar and consistent rate. They are, and not just hiring, right? I mean, they are paid equally. They are given the same working opportunities with the same promotional opportunities, and so on and so forth. So I strongly think we in India, we still need a focus on these efforts, because there are innumerable indexes. I mean, Annie spoke about the GDP requirements, and the corporate researches, etc., which is done to show that the gap is not only in terms of the difference between female and male talents, but it is also between gender pay gap for the same role that two individuals are doing. Now, to your question in particular, Liji, do we need to address the other diverse talents, like people with disabilities, LGBT plus talents, multi-generation? The answer is yes. Please understand that a diverse workforce is a combination of diversity of orientation, it's diversity of thoughts, approach, gender, ability and experiences, and so on and so forth. So in order to for any business to thrive and sustain, you need people from all these backgrounds and identities for more innovation, right? And which is why it is important for an organization to equally focus, not one over the other, but equally focus on all the diverse talents that we have. And lastly, I would say, you can't just talk about female or male talent and leave the rest in the bucket. Because when we speak of gender, it is applicable for people with disabilities, LGBT plus community, young versus mid-age versus mature workforce, etc. So let us just not focus on on one strand of diversity, but the intersectionality and how each of these identities actually are interlinked, right? And I think once the organization really understands the basic element as simple as this, the power of intersectionality, there will be less conversation of one diversity agenda, and there will be more, conversation on the overall D&I and how it plays out to the business and for the well-being of all the employees. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Thank you, Jiby, for sharing that. And you also throw light on a very interesting aspect wherein diversity is probably the first rung of that ladder. And then in terms of, helping those diverse as individuals thrive in a particular team or a workplace, an organization, their pay groups, their promotions, their, the career progression, everything along with that. That's where the conversation of inclusion again comes into being, right? So from a very from a ground level, let's ask, as much as each one of us would love to be part of this conversation and do something really actionable, we do realize that diversity and inclusion is a space that requires quite a bit of bravery and courage. I mean, you just got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, be it conversations, be it new things that you've not done before or tried before. And we also realize that it's not just the role of the underrepresented or the non-stream groups alone. So even for those diverse groups, we need voices, as all voices need to be heard, and we need allies today perhaps more than any other time. So how do I become an advocate for others, or how can I be an ally, and that to a good one at that? Annie, if you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, very interesting topic. Now we're getting into how do we actually put it into practice. And allyship is one of the key principles around which we are able to bring that to life. At Microsoft, allyship, diversity, inclusion, all of this is like mandatory courses that we go through. How do you get over 100,000 people to recognize the value of D&I and practice it on a daily basis? So there are these courses, and then there are these allyship and other things. There are circles, which is a regular thing. Teams and managers and peer managers and groups get together. So one of the things about courage and curiosity and courage really are two things that underpin the behavioral change that we are trying to bring about. And a lot of it is by transparency. It's through transparency. And hence, learning the principles is one thing, but actually you come face to face with it when you're sitting in a group among yourself and talking about who you are and what's different about you and what is it that you have not been talking about really, and your courage to actually speak that out. So I've had this amazing experience where folks have talked about mental health issues, for example, very openly, and then immediately you find a lot of support coming in. And needless to say, the minute you speak about it, now you can also gather support from your manager and peers. Maybe some days you need to take off, or some days you need to come in early or go late or whatever it is. The other interesting thing that I've seen is some of our very senior leaders, even one woman GM I know who's in Asia, actually spoke about her life's journey, where she started with almost school dropout, and then she's now a general manager in the country. Imagine somebody at that level coming out and talking about it. So it gathered a lot of support, but it also got a lot of other people to talk about what they were dealing with. So I'm personally seeing this practice of helping people build that courage, because courage is something, it's also dependent on, within a work environment, it's also dependent on how the peers see it, how the managers see it. So it's not an individual journey really. While it starts with me, it's really a group journey. And so the communities of practice, or ERGs as we call it, employee resource groups, which are aligned around all these diverse groups, actually give you the first base to be open and speak about it within like-minded people. And the second base that you get to is a courage to speak out with people who don't know anything about it, the general people around you. So and we are still in that journey. So I'm sure there is a third base and a fourth base we will get to, but already it's empowering people to just speak out and ask for what they need.
That is great, Annie. I would very personally resonate with that because I'm a huge proponent of the power of vulnerability and especially vulnerable leadership. And as glossy as that sounds, I would admit it is perhaps the most difficult thing to ever do, to let your guard down and to tell someone that you do not know. I mean, I do not know. I failed. I made a mistake. I'm not sure. I don't have the answer for that. And there's the inherent fear of trying out something new. As I could be curious, but I just don't know if I would hurt someone and all of that. So that's great. And communities of practice or ERGs definitely help make strides in that aspect. So thank you for sharing that, Annie. Jiby, what would you say to that on allyship?
Great points, Annie. And just gonna build on what you said. I think for me, first of all, we need to understand that allyship or the word ally is actually not a noun, right? It's a verb, which means it takes a certain responsibility and roles for being an ally, and just than just saying it over a coffee conversation. So in my personal view, allyship is about being an upstander. Now, most of us, we are all good people. We would denounce inequality, we would denounce injustice, and so on and so forth. But it is important to note that that allies are not defined by the assignment of the term. One cannot just simply declare themselves as ally because of the fact that they believe in justice. Now, allies are defined by the various actions that they take. In other words, the question to ask oneself is that, am I an ally? Am I truly an ally? But rather, how have I advocated, or supported or marginalized people or communities today? Now, few recommendations that I can share at the top of my mind, which I personally do in my journey of allyship, is first, educate yourself. So I educate myself about a group that I pledged to be an ally for. I take considerable amount of time to read, to listen, to watch, to deepen my understanding about that community first. Second, we need to also understand is to own our privilege. Now, what does that mean, right? Now, being an ally requires you to recognize that there are advantages and there are opportunities and resources and power that you have automatically been born with, or you've been accorded with. For example, a heterosexual person, an able-bodied person, or someone from a certain higher section of the society, or you have an opportunity to pass out from a decorated business school, so on and so forth. Now, what is the meaning of owning your privilege is, it can be very painful to listen to, but it often, but not always, but it often means admitting that you haven't entirely earned your success. There are so many other factors that has contributed towards your success. And once we realize that, I think our position of allyship, or our position of privilege, it is easy to relate to someone who doesn't have that privilege. And that's the key to become an ally, right? Third thing I generally say in most of my DNI sessions is also about be a visible ally, which means that when you see something, say something, right? Now, in my view, this is the most taxing ally work. I think an ally need to be vigilantly monitoring your workforce, any sort of discriminatory actions or behavior which is happening around you, and then be clear and decisive in shutting them down. don't wait for the marginalized people to react or to come and report this out, right? So when you witness discrimination, don't approach the victim later to just offer your sympathy, which what happens in most of the cases. Or, what, I just got to know that you have gone through this. I'm sorry, or I wish I was there for to support you. So I think to give them the right support in the moment is also a very, very big responsibility of a visible ally. So these are my some top three recommendations.
Thank you so much, Jiby. I can, those are very new insights, new learnings for me as well in terms of owning your privilege. And especially the last one, I would say a lot of us are, silent warriors when it comes as to allyship, where we would really sympathize or empathize with the cause.
Can I
But it
just give
takes,
you one example, Liji?
yes, please.
This was just around in one of my previous organizations where a very, very senior female leader was just on her way to the interview, and one of the male colleagues, and she's a very senior, she's a C-suite leader, and one of the male colleagues ended up saying, "Oh, you know what? I mean, you would anyway get this interview through because this is open for a female candidate." And when she came out of that interview, she had the self-doubt whether she actually got through the role because there was a reservation or anything associated with that. When she told me that, I could not do anything, right? I mean, she told me that with a greater responsibility, perhaps for me to just go and have that shared conversation with that male colleague, which I did not do. So my biggest learning as in my journey of allyship was, you do not have to wait for the victim or for somebody who has faced that discrimination to come and tell you that. But if you really, really notice, I think I can be a visible ally if I address it then and there itself.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Jiby. And oh, does it take a lot of courage to be able to do that, at least at the ground level and for engineers or even for senior engineers. But that journey from being a peacemaker, even if you may, to a change maker is quite a bit. And I know, Sunita, that we've discussed those variations in some of our previous conversations. If you'd like to share your thoughts as well.
Sure. I mean, I think Annie and Jiby really covered it awesomely, right? Definitely having a framework in the company which makes allyship the thing to do, right? So that means having support groups, affinity groups. We do something in Target called listening sessions. So we get all of these women or different affinity groups to come and share what are the things that they have faced in their careers. So just making it easy for people to share their life's journey, and both leaders, team members, everybody be vulnerable and make it almost habitual. Walking the talk, right? As you be called out, how do you visibly call out when you see something that isn't right? Making that normal. These are all, I think, things that we keep working on as a company. We're not perfect, we're not there yet. But the most important thing is for us to set the right intention and to reward the right behaviors. So when we promote people, we don't look at only their outcomes. We also look at the behaviors, right? What have they done from inclusion aspects? How have they been an ally? So what does it even mean to be an ally, right? It's not to just be a supporter, but to be a promoter, right? So you need to actually take a chance on other people. Someone took a chance on you. How can you repay that to somebody else? I think if everyone just, it's like each one advocate for one other person who's different from you, who comes from a different background, it could go a long way in the company. So I think it's a combination of several things, right? Framework, making it easy and safe for people to talk, and knowing that if someone doesn't understand the culture and they're saying something that's off, somebody else will call them out for it in a respectful way, right? And support. I think that is where we all need to be going towards for allyship. But really, I think Annie and Jibi covered all the points beautifully.
Great, great. Thank you, Sunita. But I must
Lizzie,
admit, as much as we'd all like to pay it forward to people who have given us those chances, and for all of us who've been allies for someone in some way, in some capacity, we would probably agree that this is quite a challenging journey for us. It is not a destination, of course, but to just be fair and practical with our audiences, would also be interested in knowing, if someone chooses to be an ally, to stand up and to advocate for whatever the cause that they deem fit, what challenges do you think they are most likely to face in their journey? Something from your experiences or your insights. What are those challenges you think they are most likely to face when, say, they want to drive a DNI initiative in their workplace? And do they go all out and get started, roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty? Do they, what is something that they can expect to see? Jiby, if you'd like to start.
I'm just kind of gathering my thoughts around that question, but I guess a couple of challenges that perhaps I've heard through my peers and also in my own journey of allyship is that whenever we stand or we even sign up for a particular group in the workforce, we are immediately tagged in term that, oh, maybe perhaps you're also from that particular group, right? I mean, most often that tagging happens. Now, I've heard this in the case of LGBT plus allyship. A lot of people who then go back and question the allied. So, are you from the community? Are you a LGBT plus individual? Now, this can be a deterrent factor for them to sign up in the future. Sessions or whatever, or to be a visible ally for that matter, right? So I think these conditioning and these terms that we are always constantly hearing of is something that a lot of allies they find in their journey. Secondly, I also feel that a lot of these the burden is there on allies that they should or they would know everything about that particular community. And therefore, they're very scared of making mistakes, or they're very scared of carrying this burden that what if I make a mistake, I would not be an effective ally, right? And I think that is a notion. Because and that should not stop you from becoming an ally for a particular group for that matter. I think as an effective ally, I'm prone to make mistakes, but the key is not to repeat those mistakes, right? So I think that, and it's in line with my previous answer. Always educate ourselves. If we go wrong in the way, it's fine to kind of say sorry to that person or say sorry to that community, and but just to get our lessons learned and and kind of move forward. We might not know it all, but it's a journey of an ally. But if you're doing that mistake again, so that's an intentional one, right? And so that's the kind of time check that we have to do on ourselves as an ally.
That's so good to hear from you, Jiby. I personally struggle with that a lot. I would tell you, I had my apprehensions in getting something wrong, especially whether it's just like you deal with the technical aspects of things, even on the non-technical side, saying the wrong things and getting the wrong things. There's no going back from there, and that kind of it gives you. There's time that takes you over that, so that's good to hear that it's a journey, and curiosity probably is the first qualification there, so that's good. Sunita, if you would like to add to that.
I think personally, right, speaking personally, I think my biggest, I would say, opportunity or the challenges that I have faced is my own feeling that I know about the struggles women face, right? So, if I'm an ally for other women be it inside the company or outside the company, women in STEM, I'm definitely a vocal ally. I try to help and promote and advocate for women, to move into leadership positions. But what I feel that I need to still work on is my education piece. I come with my own privileges. I am city educated. I am upper middle class. I am from a certain community in India, which has got a lot of privileges, is known for being well educated. What about women from smaller towns, right? So what about women who don't actually speak English that well? How can they, they're not seen as great communicators. But they may have fantastic ideas. How can they move into leadership positions? Those types of problems are, I find, are not often very clued into, because my perception is I'm a woman, so I know everything about it. So, everyone needs to, it's a good reminder always when I hit a roadblock, I am always surprised that, oh, I hadn't thought through it. So, like Jiby said, okay, accept it. Accept that there's so many dimensions to this and you're never going to know everything. But then keep your mind open and keep learning. Don't ever reach this point where you say, I know it. And so, I'm done with this, just because even if you belong to that particular community, it's still so many things to learn. For me, I think that has personally been a very rewarding journey, right? Because examining and reading feminist literature, talking to people, it helps me put my own problems, my own journey into perspective. So, how much enriched I become by continuing to go on that learning path while I'm being the ally, right? So, the benefit to me is immeasurable. I think that is also something we don't want to only talk about the challenges. As you become an ally and become interested in people outside of you, there's so many experiences that will be parallel to what you're facing, and you can learn about yourself so much and become a much better person. I think that is also something we want to make sure that we are sharing. Right? We shouldn't make it like allyship is such a hard path. There is a lot to be gained from that experience.
Absolutely, Sunita. And you being an avid reader, I can just about imagine the kind of insights and the perspectives that you'd have actually gained from that and reflected on your personal journey as well. But interesting when it's that you should neither think that you don't know anything, and you neither should be too confident about that as well. So that's a great combination. Annie, if you would like to share your thoughts on.
Yeah, so I think everybody who is watching this and everybody who is on this panel, we are all very privileged to be in the tech industry in some way. So how can you or me as a person contribute to this whole inclusion and diversity initiative? Being in organizations where there is power and privilege as well. So a few things, because I recently with my group of we have a volunteer army and we launched the Code Without Barriers, which I spoke about just a while ago. So that's about increasing developer diversity. Now, so I'll talk from my experience in that journey itself. First and foremost, we need to have it very strongly rooted in our mind that we have a responsibility to actually work on diversity and inclusion or any of those kind of purpose-driven missions. So it's very clear. I mean, it's as much for me as for you, but that's our responsibility. The second is know that you have power and privilege, which you can leverage to actually make a difference. Then comes the third thing. Now, how do I use this? So I'm passionate about it. I have the power and privilege, but how do I get a whole organization or maybe a whole team to rally behind this? So there, my experience has been to align your mission of what you want to achieve with whatever the organization goals are. If you're totally at contrary to the organization goals and mission, then do it as a non-profit work outside of the organization. But if you're talking about the power you have sitting within an organization, big, small, whatever it is, or a community, and be able to move the needle on this, then align that mission, find sponsors. So I'm sure in every organization, there are some people here or there at the leadership level who can be a sponsor for this. So reach out to them, flesh out your mission and purpose and what you think will achieve to be a bigger one. Don't go with a small mission or purpose, but really flesh it out, work on it with your V team and present that to the leadership and get their sponsorship. Now your power has multiplied, right? And then look about creating the community of passionate people. So go beyond your existing team, talk about this, be a messiah, if you will. But it's amazing how people will rally around a strong vision. And if you are able to actually craft it into a a mission and very clear actionables, then you'll have a lot of people volunteering just because of their passion. Now that's a good base, and work with them, because you cannot do it alone for sure. Whatever it is, and sometimes even the organization cannot do it alone. That's something I've realized at Microsoft. Microsoft alone cannot move the needle either. So literally in Code Without Barriers, we have a coalition of partner organizations and tech communities which have come together. So think beyond yourself, think beyond your team, and gather that volunteer or coalition to actually help you craft how you translate that mission or vision to action. And this is something all of us can do, big and small. But I would encourage you to really think big on these topics, because it takes a whole lot of effort to move the needle, and we need a lot of us.
Great message, Annie, and it definitely inspiring us to, dream big and think big about this and beyond ourselves. We have the last 10 minutes of the panel discussion. I do not see any questions thus far, so probably we can finish up with our closing thoughts on, the question of the hour, which is probably how can I be more inclusive in my everyday life? In tech industry, in terms of building better tech products and services, and being a part of the tech workplace, how can I be more inclusive in my everyday life? Sunita, if we can start with you, please.
Sure, Liji, I think a lot of what we talked about so far is some things that we can do in our organizations, right? Being part of large initiatives, or big or small, but being part of initiatives that help in moving the needle. Those are all ways in which we continuously educate ourselves and keep learning, and that will it'll impact us in the way we interact with our colleagues on a day-to-day basis. I think personally, though, for me, the big thing in improving my inclusion acumen is in checking my biases, is in constantly revisiting, looking back at my thoughts. So journaling, I think, is a great way to look at who you are and how you have grown over over a period of time, right? So thinking about how did I interact with people today, what decisions did I make, and then reflecting back on that and seeing how could I have maybe approach it in a different way. How could I have checked my own biases? I think that is one way in which I have continuously improved on my inclusion acumen. Personally, I would say a lot of what we talked about today are, even if you take back 10% of it, you're going to make a significant difference in your organization, in your community. Um, and that's all you need. But if you wanted to personally grow, then I think taking time out for self-reflection, checking on your thoughts, on your behaviors all the time can actually help improve your inclusion acumen.
Great thoughts, Sunita. Unlike our intelligence quotient IQ, this quotient, our inclusion quotient, is something that we, for all good reasons, we can probably improve in terms of self introspection. So that's great news, in fact. So thank you for sharing that, Annie. What would you say in terms of being more inclusive in our day-to-day life on a personal basis? What could I do?
I am also aligned with what Sunita was saying. I don't know what I don't know. This is the biggest issue with inclusion, the blind spots. And I'm daily discovering something or the other that I thought I was good at, but really not. And so it's about listening to a wide variety of people and content. Prioritizing time for that. Literally, if you don't have time, then you're not going to do this. So carve out time to listen and then reflect. So it's more before you get the doing part. And the third piece, of course, it's speaking up, which is equally hard. But then if I don't even know what my bias is, I'm not able to really identify that when it pops up in another person's affair to actually speak up either. So it's literally carving time out, listen and reflect, and speak up.
Great. Thank you, Annie. And I know, GB, you're a huge proponent for inclusive behaviors more than anything. So if you would like to share your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. It's a my response would be a combination of what Surita and Annie's said. I completely agree that I think one is even before we address behaviors outside, we need to kind of address our own mindset and behaviors. And that can be only done if we spend enough time to understand human issues, right? I mean, I think a lot of people who are great leaders, and I know personally, they spend considerable amount of time to actually get involved in community issues. And, and because these are the community issues which actually permeate into the organizations, right? I mean, you bring your sexual orientation, your religion, your region, your caste, your big schools, and all of that into the workplace. Therefore, it's very important to kind of really spend some time, your human time out of your calendar to really understand these social issues, right? And I spend about 30 hours in a month to volunteer on various things, just with that quench of thirst about, what are these people issues? Why do they have this problem? Whether I can do a change or not, that's a further journey. So that I think that. And I don't do that with a mindset that I'm an inclusive person. It could be just about how what is this ground issue all about, and at some point you will figure out what can you contribute as. You can contribute as an individual, as a leader, as a colleague, or whatsoever, that in that sense. Secondly, I would also say that please do not treat any issue as an alien issue. Just because it did not happen with you, that doesn't mean that that's not a valid issue. It is when people come with life stories, when people come with issues around their identities and things like that, and build a story around it. We need to listen. We need to the least that we can do is that we can listen to those issues out and give value to those stories, right? Just because it did not happen to me, it's very I would say inhuman to say that I cannot relate to that story, right? And that is what the entire empathetic leadership is all about, where you can just empathize with what one person is actually going through, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the same experience for that matter. So yeah, so those are a couple of tips that I can share.
Thank you.
I wanted
Jiby.
to add one thing. Sorry, Liji. I wanted to add one
Please,
thing.
Sunita.
Is in today's polarized world, I think it's important for us to take the time out to look at a different point of view, right? So when you're consuming news, if you could be liberal, conservative, whatever your mindset is, totally fine. But are you taking the time out to read the news from another source that you don't
Perspective,
always
yeah.
read? Always balancing out, right? Just going and seeking different perspectives consciously. And that's important because otherwise you could be in the rabbit hole of thinking that, your point of view is the only point of view that's valid. And there are very sane people who are having the opposite point of view. So it's not like, 50% of the world cannot be insane. For sure, everybody else is also having a valid point of view. So constantly doing that is going to give you a check, and that becomes a behavior that becomes encoded in all of your interactions there. So I think that, especially in today's world, I think this is an important one for us to all imbibe.
Absolutely true, especially coming out of a pandemic year. That's probably one of those lessons that we all tend to, kind of realize. And like Jiby said, it doesn't have to be that you are the first party experience to that. It may be something that you cannot really comprehend upfront at first, but it doesn't take much, so to speak. I can probably share a little anecdote from one of my team conversations lately when we realized that, a person who is not really let's say, and apart from the labeling, when it's someone who was a little more shy and a little more on the introverted side. We were talking about the power of networking with this person, and we tend to discuss this as a group, as a team, and we kind of then realize, you don't need to have. It definitely helps to have a great sense of humor in any conversation. It helps to have a great personality, but really, if you need to come across, what you really need to have is deep respect and the ability to be fully present in a conversation. Use your ears and mouth probably proportionally be attentive, give that person your undivided attention, and that itself is a great step towards having that inclusive conversation versus breaking that person midway and then interrupting the thought process and so many little things. So we are almost up for time, but great conversations. I'd like to thank my panelists one more time, Annie, Sunita, and Jiby, for taking your time off and coming and sharing your thoughts with AzConf. We could not have done this without you to bring the spotlight back on the eye of inclusion. Never underestimate our power as individuals. Don't be afraid to ask questions, advocate for transparency, brace to be allies. D&I is everyone's job. Thank you so much.